Tonight, Hannah's going to finish up the story of Gideon. And then next week, we're going to go fast because we want to save time at the end of the quarter to make sure we get to the book of Ruth. And we lose a week because of Thanksgiving. So we're going to squeeze 3 chapters of Judges in next week and talk about 2 different sort of fellas. So I will have a note sheet over on the table. Feel free to grab one when you leave for next week. And if you can read Judges 9, 10, and 11, that would be great. We can move quickly through those. Come on in. It's good to see you, each one of you tonight. So we're ready, you think? So. All right. If you would, join me in a prayer, please. Almighty God, we thank you so much for this time to gather to study again from the book of Judges. We thank you for these stories that help us see the wisdom in following you, in not letting the culture around us and things that go on in this world pull us away from you. And we're so grateful to have this opportunity to take a break from what goes on around us and come together for this study. Father, be with Hannah tonight and help her to recall all that she has to say to us. Be with our friends and loved ones who may be sick or in hospital or having some other issues, maybe physical or spiritual. Please give each of them strength and be with them, be with people who care for them and look over them or see to their needs. Forgive us, Father, when we stumble and fail. We know you understand us. We know you made us, so you know how we are. But we appreciate so much the grace and mercy that you show us constantly. And we thank you for Jesus and for what he did for us and continues to do for us. And in his name we ask these things. Amen.
All right, we're going to be in Judges chapter 8. Benjamin was not happy when I left him just now, which is really throwing my brain off because I feel like I can still hear him, even though that's probably not true. But my brain. Okay. Anyway, he'll be fine. All right. So, Judges chapter 8. First of all, we've been talking about Gideon. Last week we did chapters 6 and 7, and we talked about how Gideon was called by the Lord to go up against the Midianites, their giant army, and he followed God's instructions, and they won the victory over the Midianites, and the victory was given to God. The glory is given to God. So now we're going to see what happens in the aftermath of that. So this is one of those chapters, chapter 8, that I'm quoting from Christy Huntsman for a minute here. This is one of those chapters that is incredibly bittersweet. It will leave us both cheering for Gideon and cringing at some of his poor choices. I remembered to bring my book this time, so in case any of you are wondering, which you probably all know by now, but this is the book we're kind of using as a base for our study. So I'm going to read Judges 8, verses 1 through 3 to start. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this that you have done to us, not to call us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they accused him, they're accusing Gideon here, they accused him fiercely. And he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? God has given into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. What have I been able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger against him subsided when he said this. Okay, so, Christy Huntsman again. These 3 short verses tell us a lot about Gideon and the tribe of Ephraim. We get to see the first glimpse of the prideful attitude that causes Ephraim's downfall. If you study through the subsequent Old Testament history books, you see that Ephraim is extremely self-centered. Okay, so Ephraim is self-centered and easily offended. I think it's interesting. Now, first of all, just because this is a little bit like it's been a week since we talked about this. So Ephraim is upset because when Gideon went to war, he didn't call Ephraim to come join the war with him, but he called him at the end. And at the end, Ephraim killed Oreb and Zeb, the princes. So what's interesting about that is Ephraim should have been there volunteering at the beginning of this. I mean, the Midianites are oppressing them too, but they did not come. But now that the victory has been won, they're like, "Hey, why didn't you call us so we could, join in the battle?" But anyway, Gideon could have been like, "Well, why didn't you go fight the Midianites? I mean, they're at your doorstep too." But anyway, there's a lot of different ways this conversation could have gone. I think it's interesting how Ephraim being self-centered and easily offended, how those two things can go together, being self-centered and easily offended. If you find yourself being easily offended by things, it may be a sign that you're focusing too much on yourself. Just think about that for a minute. This world we live in is full of very easily offended people. And I think this world we live in is also very self-centered. As Christians, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus. When Ephraim is offended, they respond by accusing Gideon fiercely, which is interesting because they weren't there to fight the battle, but they decide to accuse Gideon of not calling them to the battle when they should have just gone anyway. Interesting. How do you handle it when you're offended by something? I think it's easy to kind of talk about, oh, these people, they always get offended at us, but we need to kind of think about that for ourselves too. How do you handle it when you get offended by something? And what do you do when you realize that you offended someone else? That's another interesting question to think about. I think it's really easy for us to want to be very defensive if we are either offended or we've offended someone else. We want to defend ourselves instead of having humility to accept that we either made a mistake or maybe everything is not all about us and something else is going on over here. So Gideon, in this situation, responds to Ephraim's offended attitude with humility and wisdom. He basically says that, what have I done in comparison with you? You guys are your grape harvest is better than our family's. That must have been a big thing back then. Like, wow, look at your grapes. They're really nice grapes over there. And not only that, but the Ephraimites were the ones who got to kill the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. So he's like, hey, you guys, like, why are you even upset at me? You guys did this great stuff. You're great. He humbles himself and recognizes them and what they're doing in a situation where he could have easily taken offense to and been like, well, what do you mean? I just defeated the Midianites. I mean, you know. But he uses a lot of wisdom and humility in his response. And I think that this should remind us of when Gideon's father smoothed things over in Judges chapter 6 after Gideon tore down the idols in his house. The people come and they're like, bring this man out so he shall die. If you remember, I used a little analogy of the mom kicking the video games out of the house. Bring her out so that she can die. Okay. So maybe that'll help you remember. I don't know. But Gideon's father was very, very humble and his response to it, he's like, well, if he tore down these altars of Baal, why doesn't Baal come down and deal with him himself? But he used wisdom in his response, and Gideon used wisdom in his response in this situation. Let's go real quick to Matthew chapter 5. You guys probably could quote this verse, honestly. I really don't need to go there, but just for the sake of it, let's just go there. Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Peacemakers do not compromise truth, but they use wisdom and humility in the way they approach a tense situation. Kind of like Gideon's father is a great example of this. When he said, well, if Baal is upset about his altar being torn down, why doesn't he come down and defend himself? That was a very wise thing to say. It did not compromise any truth, but it was wise, and it calmed the situation. So, so peacemakers don't compromise truth, but use wisdom and humility. All right, we're going to move on from that. And I'm going to read a long section here, so verses 4 through 17. And Gideon came, and this is back in Judges 8. And Gideon came to the Jordan and crossed over, he and the 300 men who were with him, exhausted yet pursuing. So he said to the men of Succoth, please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. And the officials of Succoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army? So Gideon said, well then, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will flail your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. And from there he went up to Penuel and spoke to them in the same way. And the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered. And he said to the men of Penuel, when I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army, about 15,000 men, all who were left of all the army of the people of the east, for there had fallen 120,000 men who drew the sword. And Gideon went up by way of the tent dwellers, east of Nobah and Jogbehah, I don't know how to say that, and attacked the army, for the army felt secure. And Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them, and captured the 2 kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna. And he threw all the army into a panic. Then Gideon the son of Joash returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres, And he captured a young man of Succoth and questioned him. And he wrote down for him, the officials and elders of Succoth, 77 men. And he came to the men of Succoth and said, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are exhausted? And he took the elders of the city, and he took thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them taught the men of Succoth a lesson. And he broke down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Okay, so, wow, that's a turn of events. What were we just saying about peacemaker and wisdom and humility? What happened? Okay. I'm going to read, again, a little section out of the book from Christy Huntsman. In this passage, the reader can obviously see the division occurring at a national level. Not only do the tribes not work together, they now actually hinder one another. These Israelites across the Jordan River should have shown Gideon and his men hospitality and love. Instead, they mock the weary warriors. We now see Gideon at his breaking point. He is exhausted and frustrated, and his response reflects this. Okay, so division occurring at a national level. Boy, does that bring some things to mind. I hate to remind you, but masks, COVID vaccines, Trump versus Biden, Charlie Kirk's death. Did anyone's blood pressure start to go up when I mentioned these? What happens when there's division in our nation? What happens? The country isn't just, and I'm using double negative here, and this really confuses me, but I'm trying to say this right. I hope you get it, what I mean by this. The country isn't just not working together, but it's literally just destroying itself on the inside. What happened when Gideon conquered the Midianites and they didn't work together to defeat Israel? If you remember what happened, they let's see, in verse 22 of Judges chapter 7, when they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army, and the army fled. And so what happened is they destroyed themselves. Now, of course, that situation, God set their swords against each other. But what do you think is going to happen if there's division in the church? It can destroy itself. Small congregations have destroyed themselves over having division within them. Or big congregations too, honestly. It doesn't matter what the size is. But what happens when there is division in the family? It's going to destroy itself if it's not fixed. Let's go to Mark chapter 3. And I'm going to read verses 24 and 25. If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. That's pretty sobering when you consider it in the context of your own home or your own church family. A divided kingdom will fall. A divided house will fall. Divided church will fall. Don't let your home be divided. Don't let the church be divided. And pray for healing in our country. Don't be a part of the problem. Don't compromise truth, but do use wisdom and humility. Be a peacemaker. I bet you didn't know that a lesson about a man of war like Gideon would have so much talk about being a peacemaker, did you? But this is serious stuff that we have to be on guard against division. We have to think about how we say things and the way that we interact with others, because one moment of frustration can lead to years of disasters. Upon his return in Judges chapter 8, verse 13, whoops, I am in the wrong chapter. Let me get back there. Gideon begins to treat the Israelites across the Jordan as if they were the enemy. Now, first of all, they definitely did kind of act like enemies a little bit. But his reaction is pretty extreme. It's interesting to me that often we take out our frustrations on the people closest to us. And I want to ask this question. How do you think that knowing that we often take out our frustrations on the people closest to us should change how churches and families take care of each other? Since we know that people tend to take out their frustration on those close to them, shouldn't we proactively take care of each other and notice when someone needs a break, or maybe they need some help with something, or maybe they really just need a kind word? This world is hard and we're all out in it, and sometimes that's what makes the difference between a divided house or a divided church and not. A kind word, somebody noticing when someone's overwhelmed and being like, hey, let me help you with this. Let's get you taken care of. Let's have a day where I take care of you instead of you taking care of the world, We have to notice when our brothers and sisters or our spouse or our kids are worn down, so that we can prevent the frustration and the division that can occur as a result of that. Now, if the Israelites had taken care of each other, how do you think the story would have ended differently? Would have been a really different situation, wouldn't it? If they had just spared a little bit of food. That was all Gideon was asking as they traveled. He's like, can my men have some bread? Man, all this half of the chapter wouldn't have even been there. just over food, just a little bit of food. They just needed a little bit of something to keep them going. But no, they did not. They were not willing at all. So now this isn't to let Gideon off the hook. I hope you all, I don't know if this is all in the back of your mind. You're thinking, yeah, I know, but Gideon still made these horrible threats and went and did all this terrible stuff to them, and all it was a bread. Okay, we're not going to let Gideon off the hook completely either. He overreacted in his frustration. I did think it was interesting in verse 16 where he says, and with them he taught the men of Succoth a lesson. So, yes, he may have overreacted, but there was a lesson they needed to learn, so I guess that there was that justification a little bit. But, yeah. So, if we take out our frustration constantly on those closest to us without learning some self-control, then we're going to really hurt the people closest to us. And because of Gideon's reactions, Israel as a whole was weakened. There's no getting around that. Even if it had some justification behind it, it weakened them. So this is a question where I'm just going to be real honest with you. Do we ever let our exhaustion and frustration affect how we respond to people or our kids? Yes. I'm going to say yes. I don't know, maybe some of you have figured out the secret to not letting that happen. And that is my question here. I want to ask you, this is a real question because I keep saying that I'm going to ask you and then I just keep talking. But this is a real question where you can say something. How do we prevent our exhaustion and frustration from affecting how we respond to other people? Does anyone have any ideas about this? I'm really asking. I don't have an answer on my sheet. I've been thinking about it. I don't have an answer, but maybe some of you have thought about this before.
Leaning on God and learning how to lean on others and being like, okay, I need a break before I hit my limit. Especially as like moms of young kids, you know, hit your limit, you're like, I'm done.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, like recognizing that it's important and
Mm-hmm.
like saying, like you're saying, like stop being selfish. You can see like if someone's tired or
Mm-hmm.
struggling, you just reach out.
Yeah.
And help you.
That is a great answer. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Does anybody else have anything?
Some parents tell their kids to, count to 10 before you go off on your sibling or whatever.
Yeah.
Trying
Be
to
slow.
develop patience by counting when they're young.
Yes, that is probably good for us as parents or people interacting with people, anybody. Sometimes we need to wait a minute for our reaction. Be like, okay, let me think for a minute. Let me think through this. Sometimes there have been times where something happens and I react immediately by like typing up this long message to somebody. And then I type it all out and then I put it away. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to come back to this in like an hour. An hour later, I look out, I'm like, ooh, I am never going to send that. Delete. What was I thinking? Yeah, I've done that a lot of times, honestly. But yeah, if only like in real time, that's a little bit harder when you're like, your kids have just, I don't know what they did. Threw their snack on the floor for the 100th time and you're just like, stop doing that. It's harder to just pause and be like, let me just go type out my frustration for a few minutes and then put it away. But maybe that would help. I don't know. Be like, I need a minute. I just need to go type something real quick. But it's hard. And in the moment, we have to remember, though, we have to take a breath and think and be like, okay, maybe I need a minute. Maybe I need to think about this before I react. And sometimes we just need to be really good at saying sorry. That's another thing, because if we do let our emotions get the best of us, our exhaustion and frustration, those things are kind of valid. Sometimes, man, you have been hit with 1,000 things today and you're just like, I cannot take one more. But I have no like it's the end of the day and there's nobody that's gonna save you from it, and it's hard. And sometimes you have to go back and say, hey, I'm sorry I acted that way yesterday or today or whenever. I'm sorry about that. I was having a hard time. I'm sorry, and I'll do better next time. I'll think. Or maybe I just give me some grace. But yes, okay. So, very important things. Very interesting, the turn of events, the difference that it made to be exhausted and frustrated in Gideon's response. Because when he first responded in the beginning of the chapter, it was so humble and wise, and then exhaustion and frustration come, and what happened? So it's a good thing to notice. We need to know that about ourselves too, that when we're starting to get overwhelmed, like you said, be ready to maybe ask for help or take a break or something. All right, so we're going to move on. I'm going to see what time it is so I can pace myself. All right, good. All right. Verse 18 in Judges chapter 8. I'm going to read through 21. All right. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, "Where are the men whom you killed at Tabor?" They answered, "As you are, so were they. Every one of them resembled the son of a king." And he said, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you." So he said to Jether, his firstborn, "Rise and kill them." But the young man did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a young man. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Rise yourself and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength." And Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. Okay, so I had to do a little research on this because some of the wording in here, I was like, okay, what is he talking about? When he says, like, where are the men you killed at Tabor? Like, who's he talking about? They were my brothers. What's going on here? I don't remember this. Okay, so I had to look into this, and I found. Well, let's go ahead and go to chapter 6 real quick. Go back to chapter 6 and verse 2. This is the beginning of the story. "And the hand of Midian overpowered Israel, and because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds." Okay, so the people of Israel have literally been forced out of their homes, and they are living in caves and dens in the mountains. That's really easy to miss when you're just reading through these lists of, the Israelites planted crops and they stole all their crops and stuff, just that stood out a little more to me when I was reading it. But, so what happened is that Gideon's family, and he says right in verse 19, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother." His brothers were in these caves, and Zebah and Zalmunna killed them in cold blood. They killed them, and I'm sure they killed many others too. So that's what Gideon is upset about this, because he was like, if I would have let you live if you hadn't have killed my brothers. But let's go over to Numbers chapter 35. Way back, Numbers chapter 35. And I'm going to read verses 16 through 21. Well, yeah. "But if he struck him down with an iron object, so that he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. And if he struck him down with a stone tool that could cause death, and he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. Or if he struck him down with a wooden tool that could cause death, and he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. The avenger of blood shall himself put the murderer to death. When he meets him, he shall put him to death. And if he pushed him out of hatred, or hurled something at him, lying in wait so that he died, or in enmity struck him down with his hand so that he died, then he who struck the blow shall be put to death. He is a murderer. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death when he meets him." Okay, so Gideon is the blood avenger for his brothers. So what is the right/responsibility of Gideon as the avenger of blood for his brothers? Yes, to put the murderer to death. In Christy Huntsman quotes Chuck Horner from World Video Bible School in her book and says, "It is likely that Gideon asked his son Jether to kill them because this would have been a more shameful death. It would also have added to their pain because a young boy would not have been able to wield a sword as forcefully as Gideon, a strong and seasoned warrior." also, another thing that stood out to me when I was reading this was thinking about the fact that Gideon had a son, because Gideon has just been in this epic battle, and when you start reading about him as the youngest in his family and the weakest family, and that's the information you have before he goes into battle, I always pictured him as like very young, like maybe 20 years old, like this young man. He's the youngest of his brothers. He's living in his father's house. I mean, I just always pictured it that way. But we see right here, he has a son who is a young man. So Gideon is actually not a young man when he's going out to fight the Midianites. And he had at least one son and maybe a wife if she wasn't passed away or something. We don't really get much information about his family, but it is interesting because I don't know why I always had that picture of him as this young, inexperienced young man. But when he is, confronted with the angel telling him to go up against the Midianites, he's a man with a family. So that's just interesting. And so he puts to death Zeba and Zalmunna because they had killed his brothers. It's interesting because he also could have put them to death for all the reasons he already was teaching them all a lesson and stuff, and Zeba and Zalmunna were the kings of Midian, so they were the bad guys. I mean, he could have put them to death just because of the oppression they had caused to Israel, but he chose to point out the fact that they had killed his brothers and made it very personal. All right. So let's move on to verses 22 through 28. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also." Interesting right there. We just see that he has a grandson. "For you have saved us from the hand of Midian." Definitely not a young man if he's got a grandson. Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you, and the Lord will rule over you." I don't know why these thoughts are kind of popping into my head while I'm reading this. Maybe his grandson didn't exist, but they're just saying, your family line is going to rule over us. So maybe he did just have a son. I don't know. That's possible. Okay. And Gideon said to them, verse 24, "Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil." For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered, "We will willingly give them." And they spread a cloak, and every man threw in it the earrings of his spoil. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and beside the collars that were around the necks of their camels. And Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city in Ophrah, and all Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. So Midian was subdued before the people of Israel, and they raised their heads no more, and the land had rest 40 years in the days of Gideon. Okay. What was Gideon's response to their request to make him king? Yep, that's right. God is our king. And he said no. Christy Huntsman says, even though Gideon says these words, his actions don't seem to match. Gideon pays lip service to God by formally denying the throne. However, he still behaves as if he is a monarch. He takes a tribute from the people, and more specifically, he takes many of the things that would have been considered royal spoils, such as the purple robes and the crescent ornaments. That's it. This is interesting. I did read a little bit different interpretation of this. I'm not really sure which I agree with more, but that Gideon did want to give God the glory and do what was right, and that when he made the ephod, that there was something about that where he could have made it and used it in such a way that would have gone along with the law, and he was doing it, and then his family, it became a snare to them and they started using it improperly. I don't really know much about that. It's just another viewpoint that I saw. But Christy Huntsman says that, and it is interesting that the spoils he took would have been considered the royal spoils. But the point is, Gideon makes the ephod out of the spoils of war. Whether or not that was wrong to do, it doesn't really particularly say, except that it became a snare to Gideon, his family, and all of Israel. Wow, that escalated quick. So, after tearing down the idols in his father's house, Gideon turns back to the sin of his father and allows that in his own house. That's really sad. Like Gideon, we can easily become, and this is Christy Huntsman again, we can easily become complacent in our victories. We defend our beliefs with bold words, but our actions don't back up our faith. We may even build blatant idols for ourselves while virtuously proclaiming to be a Christian. What can we do to recognize when our words and actions don't line up? I feel like this is kind of a personal question. Like, it's, what can we do to recognize when our words and actions don't line up? But what comes to mind to me is just that we need to be constantly in the Word of God. We need to be reading our Bibles, because that's how you're going to know if you are doing what you're supposed to. The Bible is our guidebook for life. If you don't read your Bible, the world will tell you anything is fine. You can do whatever you want. You don't even have to feel bad about it. But the Bible tells us what we're supposed to be doing, what pleases God, what leads to the good life. It's the best way to live our lives. The world lies to us. It lies. So we need to be in God's Word so we know what we're supposed to do. All right. Last few verses here. I'm just going to summarize this last part. Gideon had a whole bunch of wives, and he had 70 sons. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, I have 3 sons, and I'm worn out. I guess he had a bunch of wives to help corral them all, but woo. And a concubine, okay. Anyway, and the concubine bore a son named Abimelech, which Darla will be talking about him next week, so just so you know where he came from. Gideon died at a good old age. He was buried in a tomb. And this verse 33, as soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. The people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hand of their enemies on every side, and they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. Okay, wow. As soon as Gideon died, as soon as he died, did you catch that? Like, immediately. Everything's great in verse 28, but I mean, I kind of wish I could just stop reading right there and let that be the end of the story. The land had rest for 40 years in the days of Gideon. But, alas, that was not the happy ending. Again, we see a whole generation being lost because the previous generation did not remove the stumbling blocks from them. Gideon allowed that ephod in his house. It became a stumbling block to him, and it became a stumbling block to his family and all of Israel. Can you imagine thinking of things in your own house that way? Let's go back to the video game example. The video games are a stumbling block to you, to your kids, and then the whole world. I mean, it escalates. Idols, they may seem like they only affect you, and maybe it's just your little struggle you have, but it's going to affect everyone around you. And it's sad. Gideon, there's peace while he lives, and Gideon himself is mentioned in the great hall of faith in Hebrews 11. He was mentioned as a man of faith and he was greatly honored in that, even though that he had that snare in his house. But his faith was not passed to the next generation. Have you passed your faith to the next generation? Is it going to last beyond your life? And that's a question we can't really answer, but we need to do everything we can to help our kids take this seriously. Don't just think that coming to church on Sunday is good enough. That's not enough. We have to get idols out of our lives, and we have to teach our kids and pass it on to the next generation. Let me see what time it is. Okay, basically time to done. I just want to really quick mention one last thing. I'm just going to read this real quick. Gideon is generally considered to be a type of Christ or a foreshadow of Jesus. Gideon had humble beginnings like Jesus. The prophet Isaiah explicitly connects Gideon's victory to the coming of the Messiah in Isaiah chapter 9, verses 2 through 7. Gideon's battle against the Midianites represents God's eventual ultimate victory over sin and Satan, which is accomplished through Jesus. So that's a really interesting thing to study on if you're ever interested in that. I didn't go into that much today, but I wanted to point it out because it is interesting the way that Gideon's life kind of foreshadows Jesus. All right, and that's all. You're free to go.